Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker on another historic day in this country as former President Trump faces his fourth criminal indictment in just 5 months, this time in Fulton County, Georgia. In a sweeping 41-count indictment, a grand jury last night charged the former president and 18 others with felony racketeering in connection with efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Mr. Trump's co-defendants include some of his top allies, his attorney Rudy Giuliani and his former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis outlined the charges in a news conference late last night, telling reporters she intends to try all 19 defendants together, and she hopes to begin that trial within the next 6 months.
Georgia, like every state, has laws that allow those who believe that results of an election are wrong, whether because of intentional wrongdoing or unintentional error, to challenge those results in our state court. The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Willis says she's giving every defendant the chance to voluntarily surrender to authorities no later than next Friday at noon. So here's the full extent of what they're facing. Over 98 pages. The indictment describes Mr. Trump and his allies as criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in various criminal-related activities, alleging members of the enterprise corruptly solicited Georgia legislators to unlawfully appoint their own presidential electors for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald Trump. Former President Trump has responded defiantly on social media, insisting he did nothing wrong and attacking Willis as corrupt. Last night, Willis responded to the former president's recent claims that the case is politically motivated. Here's what she said.
I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. The law is completely nonpartisan. That's how decisions are made in every case. To date, this office has indicted, since I've been sitting as a district attorney, over 12,000 cases. This is the 11th RICO indictment. We followed the same process. We look at the facts, we look at the law, and we bring charges.
It's worth noting the witnesses of the criminal charges now facing the presidential frontrunner, 91 criminal counts across 4 indictments in 4 jurisdictions. So let's dig into what this all means for the former president, the Republican Party, the 2024 election, and our increasingly fragile democracy. To kick things off, I'm joined by Blaine Alexander in Georgia, Vaughn Hilliard also outside the courthouse with the latest from Trump world, and Laura Jarrett has the latest on the legal developments. Blaine, I have to start with you. You have been tracking these developments from the very beginning of this investigation. So what happens next in Fulton County? What are you watching for?
Well, Kristen, I think what we're watching for is this kind of inevitable, almost trickle of defendants turning themselves in here in Atlanta over the next 10 days. You know, Fani Willis was very clear in when the deadline was, noon on the 25th. So that gives defendants about 10 days to in some way come down here and turn themselves in. Now, how that happens, where that happens, and what that looks like, those discussions are still happening, and they're happening with a number of parties. For the 18 defendants who are not the former president, I understand that they're happening amongst the DA's office, the judge who's overseeing this case, the sheriff's office who's going to be handling the surrender process, and then a number of other people who are part of it, of course, the defense attorneys as well. But for the former president, of course, Secret Service is going to be part of that process. In fact, our colleague Kelly O'Donnell has some new reporting that she spoke with her sources at the Secret Service, and they say that the Trump team has not yet communicated to them a time or a day when they plan to come down here and surrender. But notably, because of court schedules, already they're looking ahead to next week, not expected to happen at any point this week. But it is interesting, she says, according to her source, they've already been doing the walkthroughs. They've already been kind of looking at security, surveilling security down here in Atlanta to prepare for a potential surrender. Now, the other questions, though, of course, what will that look like? I've been told that nothing's off the table, theoretically. So we're talking about possible mugshots, possible fingerprints. Will it be at the jail? Will it be at the courthouse? All of those are things that are going to be ironed out in the coming days, Kristen.
Well, and you take me to Vaughn. Vaughn, I know you're talking to your sources inside former President Trump's world. Do you have any sense of what that timeline might look like? Blaine saying it's not going to be this week. But do you have any sense of when we might see former President Trump go to that Georgia courthouse and turn himself in.
Kristen, I know those conversations are actively going on today. Former President Trump is in Bedminster as we speak here. Right now, I think if we look at the calendar, and August 25th is that deadline set up by Fani Willis for him to surrender. I think all of us have covered Donald Trump long enough to understand that on the calendar is August 23rd, and on August 23rd is the date of the first GOP presidential primary debate. Donald Trump is not committed to partaking at this point, but if it is up to him when he wants to coordinate with the district attorney's office, when he'll come in to ultimately surrender, I think that you would not be wrong to be targeting Wednesday of next week as at a potential date. Donald Trump here, over the course of the last hours, we should note, has been posting on social media. In one fundraising email, he was quite explicit to his supporters that, quote, justice and the rule of law are officially dead in America. And his attorneys here in Georgia put out in a statement last night that, quote, we look forward to a detailed review of this indictment, which is undoubtedly just as flawed and unconstitutional as this entire process has been. Donald Trump told me over the weekend that he has no intention of taking a plea agreement of any kind here in Georgia or in any of his other criminal proceedings.
And Vaughn, I know you and our colleague Garrett have been drilling down on why Georgia is so important. It's obviously one of the key states that Mr. Trump would need if he is in fact nominated and wants to win the White House in 2024. Talk about, politically speaking, the impact of having this all happen in this critical state where you could say his election denialism has already been on the ballot.
Right, and then it's cost him. And you go back to last year, he tried to oust Governor Brian Kemp, who was a Republican governor who certified the election here in the state, and he failed miserably. The candidate that he endorsed, David Perdue, former senator who challenged Brian Kemp in that primary, lost by nearly 50 percentage points. It's sort of been decided not only by Republicans, but also here Democrats in the state. In 2020 there, 2021 more like it, two Democratic senators ascended to the U.S. Senate because largely of a repudiation of Donald Trump and his style of politics. Now, the complicated part of this case that is pending here in Georgia is the fact that he has 18 other defendants, not only the likes of Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows, but other prominent Republicans here in the state, including the current Republican Party chairman, David Schaefer here. And so this is really tenuous for the party if, in fact, that Donald Trump ascends to the nomination. When you look at the polling numbers for Donald Trump since his indictments, he was at just about a 15 percentage point advantage over Ron DeSantis on the day of his first indictment in March in New York. By the time his second indictment came around, that number had doubled. And now, the current national average, according to Real Clear Politics, is a 39 percentage point advantage for Donald Trump. So at least within this Republican Party, he sees the benefits politically of this. But ultimately, come a general election, that's where you're really in the crosshairs in a place like Georgia and Arizona.
No, that's absolutely right. Blaine, let me turn back to you, because as we come on the air, there has been an update on what the clerk's office yesterday called a fictitious document. It was basically circulating online yesterday afternoon and seemed to be a preview of the actual indictment. What more are we learning at this hour?
This has been one of the most strange just kind of episodes within this entire, breaking news situation, Kristen. So what we saw, just for those who aren't familiar, yes, we saw another news outlet put up charges that were allegedly coming against the former president. Then basically we learned that there was a document that went up temporarily, was taken down. The clerk's office yesterday called it a fictitious document. Within the last hour, though, the clerk put out another message giving a lot more clarity to what happened, essentially saying that this was kind of almost a test run. And then once that error was discovered, it was immediately taken down. So this is kind of the first time that they're really admitting to the fact that this was, in fact, on their website. Before, it was kind of floated out there as some sort of fictitious document. We had questions. We were asking, does that mean somebody made it up on their home computer and then posted it where you guys hacked? Or, more likely, was it a mistake? It now appears that it was more likely a mistake on their part. It was taken down immediately, but certainly caused a flurry of confusion. And I should point out that something that the former president's attorneys have seized on as kind of attacking this entire process. In a statement they put out yesterday, they said that the events of the day really just kind of show how unseriously the DA's office is taking this process. So that's something that they pointed to as well. I should give this last fact, Kristen, though. The DA's office doesn't have any share in posting that. That's not their responsibility. They're not the ones who post things to the website. So it's important to kind of parse that out. We're talking about the clerk's office, not the DA's office, Kristen.
Really important clarification there. Phenomenal reporting all night long into this morning, into this afternoon. Blaine and Vaughn, thank you both so much. We appreciate it. And Laura, you too. I know you haven't slept either, so thanks for joining me. We've been talking about this indictment throughout the day, and one of the things that you and I continue to focus on is the fact that it's sweeping. What stands out to you? And just explain the significance of these charges.
Yeah, it really sort of amounts to the deepest dive, if you will, in one particular state. Obviously, Fani Willis can only charge the crimes that happen within her jurisdiction, but she can use evidence of things that happened even beyond her borders. And that's what she did in this case, Kristen. She took things that happened with faith electors in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania to show a common scheme, to show a pattern of activity. And under the racketeering law, which is all you have to show is at least two underlying unlawful acts. It could be witness tampering. It can be computer trespass, which are crimes that she actually did charge in this case as standalone crimes, but they also serve the basis for this larger pattern of activity, this larger grandiose conspiracy, if you will. You can think about RICO or racketeering as just a fancy name for a big, grandiose conspiracy, and that's what she's alleging here, and that's what she's charged.
And Laura, how much overlap, if any, is there with Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment, and could some of the people who are named in both be more inclined to flip against the former president?
There's significant overlap of facts, of witnesses, and there's different incentives here. In this case, you have 19 people, including the former president, so 18 people not named Trump, some of whom are not household names, some of who might have different incentives when they're facing 5 to 20 years potentially in prison on that racketeering charge. Now, does that mean that they're absolutely going to go to prison? No. But are you willing to gamble on that if you're a lower-level election worker in Georgia who sort of comes upon this scheme and may not have been involved in every aspect of it, but you're still wrapped up in it because of the way RICO works? You're kind of held accountable for all the actions of everybody else. That provides different levels of incentives to potentially cooperate. And based off of our reading in the indictment, it might be the case that Fani Willis already has some cooperators and are hoping for some more.
Fascinating. One of the other things that really stands out about this indictment, and you touched on it, it mentions actions in other states, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico as well. What's the significance of that? And Laura, does it run the risk of being too broad? Could there be too much in this indictment?
Well, it's interesting. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. Part of the way you charge this case is, again, using the Georgia racketeering statute, you're allowed to sort of bring in the color of what happened, the larger pattern, to show sort of the common scheme. Even if she's not charging things that had happened in Arizona, she's allowed to bring that in. But at the same time, that provides perfect fodder for the Trump legal defense team to say, aha, see, she's going way beyond her mandate here. And you can be sure that one of the first things they're going to do, Kristen, is to try to run into federal court to say Fani Willis should not have brought this case. It was about things that he did while in office, and so therefore a federal case should be made here, not in state court in Georgia.
And of course, this is all happening against the backdrop of the 2020 presidential campaign, and Fani Willis signaling that she wants a fairly quick timeline, potentially to bring this case in the next 6 months. Is that realistic? Do you expect to see that happen?
You can understand why, sort of in her first press conference, in the heat of the moment, after a very long day of everyone waiting to see what was going to happen, she might have had an aggressive posture last night and saying, I'm going to take this case in 6 months with 19 defendants. That's not going to happen. That's just not possible. It's too many defendants. There's too many different complexities here. This is not a sort of an open and shut, easy case. It's complex, and it's complex for a reason. And she has a lot of different avenues and paths to potential conviction, but it's not going to be straightforward. And I think that was sort of more of an aspirational hope as opposed to a realistic prediction of 6 months.
And Laura, just big picture, obviously we go back to the fact that this is one of 4 indictments now. Does the judge factor in that there were 3 other indictments that were named before this one? Does that matter at all in terms of which indictment goes first?
So the judge isn't bound by the fact that this is now the fourth in terms of the sequence, but there is, again, the level of complexity here and just the realistic aspect of the fact that at least the hush money case in New York has a trial date. The classified documents case has a trial date, although we'll see whether that one sticks too. And then soon we may find out, even next week, whether the case also about election interference, I know it's a lot to keep track of, but the federal case about election interference, that one's going to have a trial date set even next week. And so given that those might already be on the calendar, of course, I think the judge is, going to take that into account. But there's nothing binding them to say just because she went last, that means the trial has to go last. I think the complexity is what's going to guide the court on this issue.
Well, we always appreciate your great legal analysis, and we want to say congratulations on being named Weekend Today co-host with Peter Alexander. We are so excited for you, Laura. We can't wait to watch.
Thank you to you, as always, for all of your support, Kristen. As always, thank you.
Always. Well, you're tremendous, and we're excited about it.
Thank you.
See you soon, Laura. Thanks. Coming up, we're sticking with the story and breaking down why Trump's fourth criminal indictment could be the most complex case yet heading into 2024. Our team of legal experts dives in next. Plus 91 criminal charges, 4 indictments, 1 frontrunner, and just 8 days until the first Republican presidential debate. How Mr. Trump's relentless legal drama is playing out on the campaign trail. That's ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The RICO Act was designed back in the 70s to prosecute organized crime, and it's arguably best known for its use in mob cases. But that's how the DA in Fulton County has charged all 19 defendants with violations of Georgia's RICO Act. The indictment lays out 161 acts it alleges were part of the racketeering conspiracy, including emails, phone calls, and tweets by former President Trump, his allies, that they carried out across multiple states. Joining me now to help us better understand the legal complexities, criminal defense attorney Danny Savalos, former federal prosecutor and Superior Court Judge Carol Lamb, both are NBC News legal analysts. And with me from Georgia is former Georgia Attorney General Sam Olens. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Carol, let me start with you. We've been talking about the fact that this is just a massive case. It's sweeping 19 defendants, 41 counts. How do you begin to prosecute a case this big, this sweeping?
Well, when you have that many defendants, there's some good things about it. There's some bad things about it. The good thing about it for DA Fani Willis is that it really does tell the whole story. Everybody who was culpable in all of this grand scheme in Georgia is a defendant in this case. Where it's not so much of an advantage is that it makes everything very unwieldy. It becomes a very unwieldy potential trial. Even pretrial, it's very unwieldy because you have a lot of pretrial motions that Danny can undoubtedly tell you about. And it's like a large animal moving underwater. It's even hard to schedule a hearing because you have so many defendants and so many attorneys in the case. But it does permit her to tell the whole story. I think one of the interesting things about this is we haven't seen a lot of evidence of people pleading guilty and cooperating here. Undoubtedly, there are cooperators. There are a lot of people referred to in the indictment as individual 1, individual 19. So obviously there are people cooperating, but we haven't seen a lot of guilty pleas being taken, and that may happen during the course of the pretrial proceedings.
Sam, let me get your take on that, because as we were just discussing in the previous segment, there has been some crossover between this indictment and the indictment brought by Jack Smith, the indictments, I should say. Do you expect some of the co-defendants to flip?
Well, one of the very interesting things is that Mark Meadows is a defendant in this case. He didn't really appear in Jack Smith's indictment. He certainly didn't appear as a defendant, and he doesn't appear to be described as a co-conspirator in the indictment as 6 others were. And I think the prevailing thought in the legal community was, well, he must be cooperating. But to have him appear in Fani Willis's indictment as a defendant really puts a big question mark on that, because you have to wonder if he's cooperating in Jack Smith's case. Why is he being indicted in Fani Willis's case? I think that's problematic, and I hope it doesn't indicate a lack of coordination between the two prosecutions. But yes, there's a question mark with respect to Mark Meadows, and with respect to the others, I think, given the fact that they're looking at potentially at least presumptive 5-year minimum mandatory sentence, I think there could be some movement on that front with some guilty pleas.
Sam, what is your take on that? Are you anticipating that we'll see some of the co-defendants flip?
So I think it's very likely that there will be some movement in that regard. As folks learn more about the 30 unindicted co-conspirators, I think that will add additional pressure. And I think that a lack of coordination with Jack Smith today should be expected, but one would expect more coordination potentially in the future.
Danny, if you were the former president's defense team, how worried would you be about that possibility?
More worried than he is. I mean, he's apparently going out, he's giving speeches. I mean, that is the curse of the defense attorney, to sit around and fret about a case when the client, especially in white-collar cases, doesn't seem to be nearly as bothered about it as the defense attorney is. So really at this stage, there's no discovery yet, although weirdly enough, these cases, most of the general public knows what's in a lot of the discovery. We've known what's in a lot of this since the January 6th committee hearings. We've even arguably known about some of it since the impeachment, the second impeachment of Donald Trump. So the defense now waits, start thinking about motions that you're going to file. You know, you talk about the timing of this case. Let me just give you an example. In the New York case, Trump tried to, but failed, to remove the case to federal court based on a law that would allow a federal official to remove a criminal case against him to federal court. Now, he lost that, but it required time. It required an opinion by that federal judge. Now, that same statute appears to possibly allow not just the official, but anyone working for him to remove that case. So now what happens if you have 19 defendants seeking removal and the judge has to consider all 19 of those removals? That's just one thing, one motion, one example, aside from all the other motions that all these defendants may be filing. We've been talking a lot about Fani Willis wanting to go to trial in 6 months. For litigants, for the attorneys, it often doesn't matter what we want in terms of timing. It's up to the court. And this court is going to be dealing with a lot of motions, to say nothing of the fact that they've had a racketeering trial ongoing in the same county that has been in jury selection for 8 months. Not the government's case in chief, not the defense case, jury selection for 8 months.
Sam, let me ask you, the indictment lists 161 overt acts of conspiracy, including some tweets by the former president. I want to read you a few of them. One of them says, Georgia hearings now on, he mentions a news site, amazing. People in Georgia got caught cold bringing in massive numbers of ballots and putting them in voting machines. Great job, Brian Kemp. The vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors. Obviously, a lot of misstatements there. Explain how these actions and how these tweets could feed into this broader case that's being brought against the former president of conspiracy.
So first of all, the former president attacked our governor earlier today, announced there'd be a press conference Monday in New Jersey, and continued the same false attacks post the indictment. I think what that shows is the value that was presented earlier in bringing a RICO case. It permits you to bring in all these issues to show what was occurring in the big picture rather than the small picture. It permits violations that technically related to other defendants than the former president. So by doing this over and over again, he's permitting the jury to literally understand why it's a criminal enterprise or why it is considered a criminal enterprise. And that's very beneficial to the prosecutor.
Carol, let me go back to you. Do you think that there will be additional superseding indictments? What are you expecting in that regard? And let me ask you about something that we've been talking about throughout the show, which is there a risk in this being so sweeping?
Well, I actually don't expect a superseding indictment in this case unless there's a defendant or more defendants to be added. It looks like the charges themselves are pretty comprehensive. So in the interest of keeping this case moving as quickly as I can, but I don't think it's going to be a quick case to get to trial. But in that interest, I wouldn't expect a superseding indictment. I want to be clear about one thing. Count one is a conspiracy/racketeering conspiracy charge. And the difference between that kind of charge and the other charges is that a conspiracy is a crime in itself. It's the agreement, and that is a crime. It's the agreement and a step taken in furtherance of that agreement to commit a crime. That is the crime. And so when Fani Willis lists all of these what are called overt acts, but they're acts in furtherance of that conspiracy, and she includes a number of things that occurred in other states, it's all very descriptive, but the jury doesn't actually have to find that all of those are proven beyond a reasonable doubt. They only have to find, in the case of racketeering, 2 that were part of the pattern, and in the case of a regular conspiracy, just 1 act beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think it's beneficial to Fani Willis to have included all of these acts as a descriptive tool, but she actually, even though she will put on evidence of all of them, she doesn't actually have to have the jury find all of them beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's a really important clarifying point. Danny, let me turn to you. You mentioned the jury. Talk a little bit about how jury selection works in a high-profile case like this. How challenging is it?
We already know that in another RICO case in the same county that it is taking a long time to select a jury against in a case against a high-profile defendant. But I'm willing to bet that however high-profile that defendant is, he's not as high-profile as this defendant, meaning Donald Trump. So jury selection is going to be even more difficult when you factor in that the defendant, one of them, is going to require round-the-clock Secret Service detail the entire time. And then the other thing, perhaps at no other time in history have we had this much detailed research about jury pools. And by that, I mean, you can look at the results of the 2016 and the 2020 election to get an idea of how jury pools might go lean towards Trump or away Trump. Now, I caution that election results are not an indicator of whether a juror can put aside their prejudices or their thoughts about a particular candidate and sit in judgment of him or her. But, I mean, never before have we had this kind of data about what to expect from a particular jury pool, whether that be New York County, whether that be Atlanta, or if they remove out of Fulton County, which is not likely, the district encompassing Atlanta, the federal district. So this is really a fascinating time where you can actually get some real hard data about the kinds of people who may be sitting in judgment of Donald Trump and his co-defendants.
Sam, let me give you the final thought here. When do you think we will see this go to trial?
I think the former president's going to do all he can through his counsel and filing many motions to delay that potential trial. And as we've already stated, the federal officer removal statute will probably be the first attempt. It will be, in all likelihood, unsuccessful, but it will cause time. I think everyone in the case on the prosecution side wants it to occur quickly. If I were the court, I would want it to occur quickly. And I think similar to the case in D.C., the extent to which the president attacks the court or attacks the prosecutor may push the court to seek to have a quicker trial.
Well, that is an interesting final point, and we will leave it there. This is complicated stuff. Thank you so much, Danny Savalos, Carol Lamb, and Sam Olens. We really appreciate your insights today. After the break, Trump trials and the trail, how caucus goers and 2024 candidates are reacting to the latest batch of criminal charges out of Georgia. We're live at the Iowa State Fair next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Turning now to the latest from the campaign trail as Republican candidates face the fallout of yet another sweeping criminal indictment against their field's frontrunner, Donald Trump. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson campaigned at the Iowa State Fair today, meeting voters and flipping pork chops. It was a traditional political scene in a primary that's been anything but. Take a listen to this exchange between my NBC News colleague Ali Vitale and Senator Tim Scott as she pressed him about the new charges and that infamous phone call between Mr. Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
We all heard that phone call with the former president, then president at the time, where he said, just find me the requisite number of votes that I would need. Doesn't that feel anti-American? Doesn't that feel like not what a president should do?
Well, we just continue to say it as I see it, which is that we see the legal system being weaponized against political opponents. That is un-American and unacceptable. At the end of the day, we need a better system than that. And I frankly hope to be the President of the United States where we have an opportunity to restore confidence and integrity in all of our departments of justice in the country.
Yeah, but that phone call, you heard it, right?
Yes, but we've just drawn different conclusions. The next question.
You think it's fine? You would do that as president? You would look for the amount of votes?
The tenacious Ali Vitale on the ground in Des Moines, pressing to get an answer to her question. Ali, great job as always. Look, you are out there in Iowa. You have been there for days. You've been talking to Republican voters about these latest charges. And that's, at the end of the day, what matters. What are the voters telling you? What's their reaction?
Well, look, certainly the candidates aren't changing their tune about the fourth indictment here. They have a playbook for this. And I think, frankly, for voters who might not have been impacted or moved by indictments 1 through 3, the fourth one is not really changing things for them. If you're in the Trump camp, you think that these things are, for lack of a better phrase, trumped up charges because of the politics of this situation. But of course, there are Republicans that I've spoken to who wish that their party would move past the former president. Some of them will engage with the substance of the charges. They think that he has a role to play, for example, in what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. They don't like that he continued to try to allegedly overthrow the election results. But then there's the slice of voters that I'm really paying attention to. And I met one of them here today. They're Republicans. They will vote in the general election for whoever the Republican nominee is, even if it's Trump. And they don't necessarily buy the charges, but that doesn't mean they're not concerned. Watch. At a certain point, even if you don't care about the charges, does it give you pause about his ability to win again?
Yes. So as far as the charges go, like I don't see anything there. But as far as someone who is a Republican, I don't see. It's hard for me to see the lane for victory for him.
And look, if there's a break coming, Kristen, that might be where the break is coming. Not because Republicans start buying these charges wholesale, but because they start thinking that it might be too much baggage for the former president to run and win with. We've only seen a few of his rivals actually try to mount an electability argument, and certainly they haven't done that using the indictments as the reason why he's unelectable. But that could be one of the avenues that if there's any kind of a schism of support within the conservative ranks of voters, that might be where it starts to come out.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the question I think we all have is, are we going to start to see these candidates make that argument potentially at the debate now 8 days away? What else did Tim Scott tell you, Ali? And are you getting a sense that he may start sharpening his tone at all?
Clearly not, unless he thinks that that phone call was okay and he would do the same thing as president. Look, Tim Scott is very good on his talking points. This is one of them. We've seen now over the course of the last 4 indictments, but 3 prior to today. We've seen the way that Tim Scott has really towed the party line, talking about this as an example of a weaponization of government against the former president. There are several of his colleagues in this Republican field who have said the same thing. I mean, you look, for example, at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis today, who basically said that he didn't get a chance to see what this indictment was about. Not that it was surprising. We knew that this one was coming now for months. And then you have other people in this field, like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's saying that even though it's a state charge, so he can't actually pardon it as president, he would do whatever he could to try to put a pardon to the former president if he were to be indicted of these latest charges. I think, though, broadly, my big question to these candidates, and they don't want to talk about this because they would rather stay on their own messages, is at what point do you go at the former president? He is the main rival for all of them, dominant in the polls. At some point, if you want to win, you got to go at him, but they don't seem willing to do that, indictments or not. Yeah,
so far they have not. We'll see what happens at that debate in just 8 days. Ali Vitale, thank you so much. Yeah. Great reporting as always. Up next, we're digging deeper into the potential political consequences as U.S. democracy faces its biggest test in generations, with the Republican frontrunner facing 4 criminal indictments. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, U.S. democracy is facing a huge test as the leading Republican candidate for president faces criminal charges for trying to allegedly overturn the 2020 election. As our friend Peter Baker with the New York Times points out today, he wrote, quote, "The nation once recoiled at presidential candidates caught driving under the influence or swiping lines in a speech without credit. Now one of the two major parties has not ruled out a frontrunner charged with conspiring to subvert democracy, endangering national security, obstructing justice, and falsifying records of hush money to a pornographic film star." I am joined now with my panel to break this all down. Axios senior politics reporter Eugene Scott, Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher, and former Virginia Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Thanks to all of you for being here. Appreciate it. Eugene, let me start with you. This is a moment where you have 4 indictments against the former president, a sweeping indictment that we got overnight. What do you make of this moment, and what are the political implications for the primary and the general? I mean, it seems like the primary is pretty immovable at this point.
Well, I'm sure it's been said a million times at this point, but it's historical, and that's not an exaggeration. We never thought we would be in this moment. One could argue there were some candidates who said that we would eventually find ourselves here in 2016, but many people who backed Donald Trump didn't think it would get to this point, and to think that it could even go on and get worse from where we even are right now is of significant concern to people regardless of their political persuasion.
Barbara, pick up on that point. I mean, what are you anticipating as you watch this all unfold? We've talked about the fact that the debate is in 8 days. It wouldn't be surprised if former President Trump tried to counter-program that in some way if he doesn't appear. But could one of the candidates gain some last-minute traction in the debate? What do you think?
Well, I think it's important to realize Trump lost in Georgia. Georgia used to be a red state. There are very popular Republicans in Georgia that won. Governor Kemp, who made a very strong statement against Trump today, who said this was a fair election. Trump is wrong when he said he won. Lieutenant Governor Duncan, who testified, as did Governor Kemp, and Brad Raffensperger. These are all people who Trump attacked, who, you know, in Kemp and Raffensperger won large last year. And they are going to be people who are going to testify against Donald Trump. So Trump has been losing in Georgia. He will lose again in 24, even if he wins a primary. So Republicans need to wake up. They are going to lose again in Georgia if Trump is the nominee. So primary voters are in a bubble where even if they're going to support Trump, he is going to lose in this red state if they pick Trump. So I think there is an opportunity, Chris Christie, who is gaining,
ground.
He's gaining ground because he, as a prosecutor, is pointing out this guy's been a loser for 7 years in the general election. So there's a real divide here between general elections. And if we pick somebody, a 4 times indicted, 2 times impeached, 7-year loser, Donald Trump, Republicans are going to lose again. And that's what Governor Kemp in Georgia is trying to warn Republicans.
Let me read what he said, because Barbara raises an important point. This is what Brian Kemp said today. He said, the 2020 election in Georgia was not stolen. The future of our country is at stake in 2024, and that must be our focus.
You know, I pick up on the excellent points that the Congresswoman was making. And to that point, Kemp was someone who actually could compete in the middle of the electorate, right? And so these battleground states, you actually have to be able to compete in the middle of the electorate. And what I said is spot on. And I'm going to push back on the immovable point that you made early on, because
you think the primary is
hold on,
okay?
Because I worked for a guy who was 40 points behind in national polls too. You might remember his name was Barack Obama. However, to the Congresswoman's point, you do have to hit the person in front of you. You're never going to, you know this from campaign trail.
Which Chris Christie is doing.
You're never going to get in front of the person in front of you unless you actually hit them. And you do have to find contrast. And watching that very excellent report by Allie, as always, Allie, great. the inability for any of them to actually hit this guy and take advantage of this moment says to me they're not serious candidates. They're not serious candidates for president.
Let me stay with that point because it's a fascinating one. Former President Obama did come from behind. He also won Iowa. Eugene, I mean, how make or break is Iowa? Donald Trump has a lead in Iowa. It's actually, according to the latest polls, not as big as his lead nationally. So but it's still a double-digit lead, though.
Yeah, and, you know, he was expected to do well in Iowa. It's a state that has supported him in the past, and so it's not a surprise that people are still on the Trump train there. What is concerning, though, to Cornell's point, is that there could be people getting off the Trump train if his opponents would point out that what he has done is disqualifying. But you can't do that when you are trying to get people who love Trump to love you as well. Trump still is leading in the GOP, and that's what we're seeing happen.
Barbara, Cornell is challenging the immovable argument. What do you think? Does he have a point?
Well, Republicans who are donating to Trump right now are donating to basically a legal defense fund. And next week, he is going to be probably not showing up to the debate. And you're going to have probably just one person, Chris Christie, pointing out those things. And actually, Chris Christie, who just went to Ukraine and was actually arguing on issues and making a case for, principled Republican policies, is going to be there pointing out, he's going to be taking on the man. And if you're not going to take on the man, you're not going to be the man or the woman. And the candidates who aren't going to do that aren't going to be the man or the woman. So I think, if Trump isn't going to show up, it's really an insult to the voters. And instead, he is going to have, Trump is going to be having to show up in court every day. And how can you have a candidate who's going to have to sit, in front of a jury every day, and he's going to be using all the money you're sending to him to pay for a legal defense instead of a candidacy?
Can I build on that point?
Please.
Because here's the larger problem for, I think, the
And he's
Republicans.
going to have he's going to have his co-defendants turning on him soon.
Right. Yes, but here's a larger
potentially.
Here's a larger problem that again Scott showed is that it's a media blackout, right? Can any of us really tell the American people know what the Republicans who barely won Congress this last time around, what have they been working on? What have they been doing? We have no idea. What is Mitch McConnell and Republicans in the Senate working on? We have no idea. It's all about Trump all the time, and that hurts not only the top of the ticket, but down
And you need
ballot.
a candidate who's talking about the future. And if you're not talking about the future, you're going to be losing. And that's the problem with Trump. He's all about the past and himself, not about the American people in the future.
I want to play a fascinating piece of video, which is a focus group of voters. This is what they're talking about when they were asked about these indictments. Let's look.
Who could tell me what this latest indictment is related to? In other words, what event? Who could tell me what this is related to? Without blurting it out. 5 of you. Okay. Shantae, what is it about?
I'm torn on the Georgia or the documents. Okay. It's one of those two.
I thought it was about the whole Stormy Daniels scandal.
Eugene, this was an Axios focus group. What does it say that these voters don't really know where we are with all of these indictments? And it's not to place any blame on anyone. There are a lot of indictments. It gets confusing.
And that's what one of the gentlemen actually said. There were 2 of these, and when they were asked, what is this one about? To be fair, this was after the 3rd indictment and before this one. But even then, they said, there are just so many. And I'm so overwhelmed. And to your point, they said, what I'm focused on is I want to know where these candidates stand on foreign policy, on abortion rights, on the economy. That's what I'm listening for. And to Cornell's point, we're not hearing that very often because so much attention is on these indictments that these swing voters still can't even explain.
Does it just become background noise, Barbara?
Well, for Trump, it's all about him. And I think for voters, they want to know, when are you going to talk about me? And next week, when at the debate, when Trump's not even there to talk about voters, I think that's going to be a problem, and Trump's going to start losing, altitude, and I think that's going to be a problem for him. And I think there's going to be an opening here, and I think there's going to be an opportunity for a candidate who's going to take on Trump and be able to articulate a message for a Republican future and a Republican vision.
Cornell, very quickly, do you think that Trump's going to start to lose altitude?
Not if they don't hit him. Not if they don't attack him. By the way, if I were Trump, I would not.
Christie is Barbara's point is that Christie.
But it's got to be more. It's got to be more.
Okay.
It's got to be more than Christie. It's got to be the ones within striking distance of him, taking him on to get ahead of him. If I were Trump, I would not show up at the debate because he has very little upside at that debate.
My sources are signaling that it's very unlikely. Great conversation. This was fantastic. Eugene Scott, Cornell Belcher, and Barbara Comstock. We really appreciate it. Thank you all. Still to come, President Biden under scrutiny, addressing those historic Maui wildfires and weighing a visit to the disaster zone. We're live in Hawaii next. You're watching Meet the Press now.
We're going to continue to coordinate relentlessly with the people on the ground to make sure the critical work continues. In the meantime, you always hear this phrase, and I've done to so many disasters in my career, it's almost hollow. Our prayers, our thoughts and prayers with the people of Hawaii, but not just our prayers. Every asset they need, we'll be there for them. And we'll be there in Maui as long as it takes. As long as it takes.
Welcome back. President Biden spoke this afternoon on the federal response to the tragic wildfires on Maui, pledging to visit the area as soon as possible. The remarks come amid scrutiny from reporters and criticism from Republicans that the president only addressed the devastation extensively one other time since the fires swept through Maui. It's been 1 week since the deadly wildfires broke out there. And as of last night, 99 people are confirmed to have died. Many more are still unaccounted for. Search and recovery efforts are ongoing, and officials say the efforts have been slow, both out of caution for rescuer safety and out of respect for the dead. But efforts are speeding up with federal assistance. Maui's police chief emphasized the gravity of the task in a press conference late last night. Look.
It's not just ash on your clothing when you take it off. It's our loved ones. That's the reverence.
Chilling words there from the police chief. NBC's Dana Griffin is near the airport of Maui for us. Dana, thank you for joining us. It has been 1 week since those fires broke out. Now, what is the very latest that you're seeing on the ground there?
Kristen, good afternoon. We know that right now about 25% of that disaster zone has been searched. We are told by Governor Josh Green that they hope to have 85% complete by the weekend. They are still finding bodies, including the bodies of children. We've heard from several residents that kids were home from school that day, and we've heard harrowing stories of neighbors rushing in to save those kids. He even talked about a family of 4 that was found together inside of a car. So this is a very methodical process to go car by car, house by house, block by block to make sure that they are not missing anyone, but it will likely take days, if not weeks, to get through this. They're also very concerned about some toxic chemicals, benzene, asbestos that could be in the air and in the soil. So that's a part of why they're not letting people back in that area, Kristen.
It's just so incredibly difficult. And you're right, that reporting that some of the kids were home from school because the winds were so heavy that day. You are expecting to learn more information publicly about the victims of the fire later today. What are you expecting?
Yeah, we're expecting to hear at least the names of 3 people that have been identified. This is a very tough situation because a lot of these bodies have been burned beyond recognition. That's why so many relatives have given DNA samples so that they can determine who the missing people are and correctly identify them. We're also hearing reports that a lot of people were found huddled together or in cars together, and some of these bodies are very delicate. So they want to make sure they're getting the proper identification and make sure that they are doing this with a sense of dignity for a lot of these victims, Kristen.
That sense of dignity is so important right now. And Dana, just very quickly, I know you're there talking to people. What do people say they need most right now?
housing is still a tricky subject for a lot of people. We know that hundreds have been placed in hotel rooms. There's going to be about 1,000 Airbnb rooms also made available. We've also spoken to the pastor here at King's Cathedral in Maui. They own the property across the street. They are working on a plan to build what they call temporary long-term housing, possibly small homes, to help put some of their people there as well. Kristen?
All right, Dana Griffin, well, please do continue to keep us updated on any developments as you get them. I know it is just a devastating, devastating time there on Maui. We appreciate all of your great reporting. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck is back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.